Poppy's will was read that summer, leaving a sum of around $2.5 million. There were weeks first of legal ramifications, until good old Milt was found with his wife at a resort on the French Riviera, sipping Turkish coffees in their swimsuits and caftans. They were arrested, and after some wrangling, admitted to about 10% of their crimes, enough to free up probate. Viva inherited 40% of his estate. Eva and Lena each received 20%. Carmen received 10%, entrusted to Leon to ensure her future caretaking, and the remaining 10% was donated to Jewish aid organizations. A few months after the will was read, Eva received an offer to teach at the prep school near Tahoe she attended as a teen. She closed her studio that next winter, and she and Viva went west at the start of 2000. Lena was heartbroken to see her niece move away, but she understood that this was part of Eva growing up, becoming a full woman. With her portion of the inheritance, Eva purchased a little ranch house near Truckee. It was on a county highway next to a small farm run by a middle-aged couple who raised alpacas and Angora rabbits. That first winter, Viva suffered crying jags, missing her Aunt Lena, Aunt Carmi, and Pop Pop. But the crying stopped around Valentine's Day when she discovered the baby animals next door. When the Hersteads adopted a llama the following Christmas, Viva got to name him, and the next year, her whole entire world was about her Yaya. She spent weekdays in daycare at the prep school, which gave her mother lots of opportunities to stop by and visit with her growing girl. Eva was focused on teaching and raising her child. She stopped worrying about how she looked. She cropped her luxurious black curls into a short pixie cut, switched out her feminine dresses for jeans and sweaters. She bought a minivan. She learned to cook, kind of. Eva and Abraham remained friends long distance. Within a year of her departure, he met a very modern Chaldean woman who owned a dating service. He joined the network, but fell in love with the owner. They were engaged within 6 months and married the following summer. They would have twin daughters and a happy marriage, a love affair that lasted 55 strong years. Every few months, Eva would call Abraham at his office, or he would call her, and they'd catch one another up on their busy lives. Out of guilt, he told his wife about the calls, knowing that he'd catch hell if she somehow found out later. But it never detracted from the love he had for his wife. Eva was merely a good old friend. The year Viva started first grade, Eva met Seamus at an alumni meeting at campus. His daughter, a senior, attended the school. Seamus was 48 and divorced for a dozen years. He built cabinets and was somewhat bohemian, very sweet-natured. They started dating. He kept his own house for the first decade, and Eva kept hers. Lena left Detroit at Christmas of 2004 to spend a year in Copenhagen. Then she kept putting off her return to the States. She volunteered at a non-profit clinic and rented a tiny apartment near the Rococo neighborhood of Frederiksstaden. It was only intended to be a vacation, but she enjoyed living in Europe. It suited her spirit. Carmen passed away in 2005 at the assisted living facility she'd been at since not long after Poppy died. Initially, she'd put up a fuss at her new living arrangements. She couldn't bear the thought of some nurse's aide wiping my ass, as she so eloquently put it to anyone and everyone who would listen. Finally, she made some friends, including Hildy, a devoutly Catholic Haitian lady who played cards with her. Carmen was not the happiest nor the grumpiest resident. Leon and Jacqueline visited her several times each week, and Tasha popped by about once a month. She was dating a convenience store clerk who dealt a little X on the side. When Tasha had her baby boy, she brought the infant to see Carmen. She sang out, "Look who's here to see you, Auntie Carmen." And Carmen snapped in response, "That's Grandma to you." But Tasha didn't pay the comment any mind. She never knew that Carmen was her grandmother. Leon never spoke about his suspicions to either of his children. Carmen would go to her grave without ever claiming her son, but Leon was with her the day she died. They were watching the news together, following Hurricane Katrina, sitting together in the great room after the evening meal, when she stopped breathing. Carmen Albert was 81 years old. Lena spent 3 weeks visiting Austria ahead of her 40th birthday. She'd always wanted to explore the homeland of her grandma. She visited Salzburg, including Mozart's birthplace, Innsbruck, where she gained 8 pounds eating Kugelhop, the waterfalls at Krimlerach, and the Stadttempel Synagogue in Vienna. She knew the history of her people in Austria, but it was hard to imagine that sordidness in such a quaint place. She sent twice-weekly postcards to Viva and made new friends on the train ride back to Denmark. Viva was never a mama's girl, although she loved her mother. Viva could be strong-willed like Eva, but more sensitive, like her Aunt Lena. She was the best, perhaps, of both of these women. She still talked to her aunt almost every month. When Viva was 10, Eva sat her daughter down and explained to her the circumstances of her birth and who her father was. She gave the girl a framed picture of Ben, but strangely it only made Viva feel more connected to her Aunt Lena. She still remembered the little flashes of Poppy. She could picture his eyes, his crinkled, laughing, black button eyes, and the smell of his aftershave. She remembered his bedroom, the deep blue comforter, and matching pillow shams. She remembered the little wind-up toys that he kept only for her. And she recalled a song he used to sing. Policeman, policeman, don't catch me. Catch that man behind the tree. He stole gold and I stole brass. Policeman, policeman, kiss my ass. Lena met a violinist from Madrid who was touring Western Europe in the summer of 2009. His father was a Moroccan, and he spoke 6 languages. Val had other women in other cities, but while he was in Copenhagen, she enjoyed what she could of him. Antonin Rushik lived in a small house on the whitewashed shoreline of North Carolina. It wasn't the nice part of the coast. He was surrounded by rednecks, Mexicans, and poor black families. His neighbors were friendly as all get out, but he consistently declined their neighborly invitations to block parties and barbecues. Every once in a while he would look around and wonder, how the hell did I get here? He stayed inside, despite the beautiful sunny weather, shopped at a scuzzy little corner market for his groceries. The house he lived in was made of cheap clapboard, weathered and gray. Bird poop seemed to be everywhere, and yucky things were forever rolling in with the tide. A child died in that tide 4 summers before, caught up in the powerful waves. The lure of the sea. Rushmore heard about the missing kid, but he didn't go out to the shore to try to find the boy, even though every one of his neighbors was there. His dreams of grandeur were long gone. His history, his ambitions, and his dark dreams of power all had faded. Almost a dozen years after Poppy's death, Rushmore died, a lonely and bored old man with not a single friend, in a house that was ill cared for. He was gone 4 days before the post lady caught the whiff of death and phoned the police. Tasha had rotten luck at romance. Each of her guys was bad news, except the third, the one she married. Carlos was older, a recovered drug addict, a little beaten down by life, but a good man. He was a cab driver and a faithful husband. He got her going to church regularly. She tried to get her husband to go back to school so he could become an X-ray technician, but it seemed as though any time they got a little money saved up, one of her 3 boys would get sick, or her brother would get in trouble again. She worked at Myers as a cashier. She had 2 boys before she met her husband, and then 1 more with him. They had many tough times. Viva was popular in school, a bit of a cut-up. She had her first alcoholic drink at 13 at a friend's pool party, and did not like it. She complained that it tastes like tush, when a friend mixed together 3 kinds of booze and 2 kinds of soda and passed it around. In her later teens, she dabbled in smoking pot, mostly because of her boyfriend, a soft-spoken graphic artist a year younger than her with a messed-up family life. She suspected he was gay, but adored him anyway. He made her laugh. She loved best the people who were truly funny, and she was a sucker for a great story. The summer she turned 15, her mother finally married Seamus. They planned a simple outdoor wedding on a friend's mountainside property. Local honey wine in mason jars and garden flowers. A handful of friends and family gathered. A folk quartet played covers of classic love songs. Lena wasn't able to fly back for the wedding, but Irene and Rayford came out. They were a bit bewildered by how low-key the whole shindig was, but it pleased Irene immensely to see her younger daughter so happy, calm, and responsible. Months after her visit to California, Irene received a letter from Vonda. A decade earlier, Vonda traveled to India with her meditation group and stayed. She lived in a rural region near Bangalore and became a Buddhist nun. The previous correspondence Irene got from her old friend was merely an envelope filled with marigold petals. This time, Vonda sent a photograph of herself. Her head was shorn, a tattoo of a Sanskrit word meaning sister was at her widow's peak, and she was hugging a homeless child she had just fed chapati. Vonda always longed for a sister, and now would have them all the rest of her days. In 2013, the city of Detroit filed for bankruptcy protection after years of financial mismanagement and after then-Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick resigned ahead of being convicted on 24 federal felony counts, including racketeering, mail, and wire fraud. Kilpatrick's activities alone cost the city an estimated $20 million. But shortly thereafter, the city discovered an additional $12 million in kickbacks to school principals and superintendents, among others. Detroit was the largest city to file for bankruptcy and resulted in the state of Michigan assuming administrative control over the local government. The governor appointed an emergency financial manager until the bankruptcy was complete. When everything came into the light, the city of Detroit was $18.5 billion in debt. During those fraught months, attention turned to the Detroit Institute of Arts, which is owned by the city of Detroit. Many citizens were concerned that the DIA would liquidate some of its holdings, including the most precious works of art at the museum. The Nut Gatherers by William Adolph Bouguereau was one of the most valuable pieces in the collection, and the city's emergency financial manager definitely inquired about the Art Institute's inventory and its liquidity. Ultimately, though, it was determined that the $1 to $2 billion in assets that the Institute of Art might net paled in comparison to the $18+ billion in debt, and that such sale would have an extremely negative impact on tourism to the state. The residents of the greater Detroit area heaved a sigh of relief that the Nut Gatherers, along with other priceless works like Detroit Industry or Man and Machine by Diego Rivera, would remain in the Motor City. Viva wasn't hurt when she found out her boyfriend slept with his next-door neighbor, his first consensual male-on-male erotic experience, and she kept her date with him to junior prom. She'd never been one to hold a grudge. She buckled down, got serious about her schooling. She decided to study geology and successfully applied to the University of California, Santa Barbara. She won a scholarship for tuition and used part of her inheritance to pay for a studio apartment off campus. 3 days before the end of the first semester of her sophomore year, Eva called her daughter in hysterics. Aunt Lena had died of uterine cancer. She told no one back home that she was sick. Lena had been depressed for several years and become quite reclusive. She battled the cancer for 3.5 years. Finally, a fellow nurse in Copenhagen helped her get into hospice. Her last months were bittersweet. She found such comfort in her nurses, having once been in a similar position. Nonetheless, she felt alone. Lena passed away during the night, in their care, so thin-skinned she appeared blue. Both Viva and Eva were bereft. Eva in particular felt a rift that could never be repaired. Her grief began to overtake her. She threw herself into work, in distraction. Viva drifted into a slump at school. She decided to take a break before winter and went to Detroit for a few weeks. She stayed with Abraham and his family. The city was barely crawling out of the economic crisis that landed it in bankruptcy. The city's coffers depleted, many houses sat vacant and ransacked. She remembered very little about the city of her birth, only Eva's stories dictated her meanderings that season. She hoped that Lena's ashes could be interred beside Ben's, but Lena was cremated and her ashes scattered in Denmark by friends. Most of Viva's days that November, December were spent on Abraham's couch. He rang Eva every few days, keeping her apprised, but she was in no better position than her daughter. What should I do? I can tell her to come home or go back to school. Abraham was more than happy to have the young woman stay there, but he did not know how to comfort her. She saw Tasha and her boys a few times while in town. Leon died of kidney failure 5 years before, and Jacqueline was trying to stay in their family home in East Point. Tasha's brother was in between stints in jail, having recently served 15 months for possession. The city was in crumbles. The ragged weeds and feral dogs had taken over, and finally, days after New Year's, Viva contacted the dean's office at school. She lost a semester, but was ready to go back to California and resume her studies. On her final day in Detroit, Tyrell drove Viva around the city of her birth, the once grand Detroit, reduced to ruin porn. She didn't know it, but the 20-year-old DeVille he drove had once belonged to Poppy. Lena signed it over to Leon after Poppy's death, and from there it passed to his own son. That afternoon, Tyrell drove her to both the B'nai David and Mashpalash cemeteries to lay stones at the graves of her father and great-grandfather. It was the final time these graves were visited by anyone. Pasha's second son, Mikhail, was shot in a drive-by in the Bagley neighborhood where they lived. He was hanging out with his friends when someone raced by and fired 7 shots, 3 of which hit Mikhail. 13 years old, he survived, but was paralyzed from the C7 down. Carlos, Tasha's husband, had an older sister in Cleveland who flew out to stay with them and help. When Leon passed away, there was a life insurance policy, and Jacqueline gave most of that money to Tasha with the promise that she would put it away. Tasha listened to her mama, thankfully. That money helped with the medical costs and wheelchair. After she graduated with honors, Viva accepted a position with the California Geological Survey. Her mother was incredibly proud, and Irene and Rayford came for the ceremony. Viva had a serious boyfriend at the time, but they parted 10 months later. Eva decided to retire as she approached her 49th birthday. She was having a minor midlife crisis. Seamus was 63 and bustled with activity in his business, but Eva felt lost. She started drinking a little more wine each night. She kept tearing up the garden, replacing it, redoing it over and over. She texted Viva on her cell every day, despite knowing how busy her daughter was with her own responsibilities. She went into crying jags when Viva didn't call back right away. She longed to reinvent herself, but did not know how. She had few close girlfriends those past few years, preferring to spend her days in her garden and with her husband. She wanted to travel, but Seamus was a homebody. Eva signed up for classes to fill her days. Watercolors, photography, soap making, qigong. She never made it past the second of any of these classes. Viva got married the year she turned 26. Her husband, 15 months older, held a double degree in psychology and marketing. He wanted to write self-help books. He wasn't working when they married, but she pressured him into taking a job in academic publishing. Eva fell into a deep depression during the holiday season of 2023, the year of Viva and Nate's wedding. At 54, she felt a quarter century older. She loved her husband, but he was so damned accepting of everything. When even her midlife crisis failed to rattle him, she'd had enough. She bought a used camper van and told Seamus that in April she was taking an adventure. When he simply shrugged and told her to do what she needed to do, Eva got hopping mad. She drove down to visit Viva and her husband, who recently quit his job at the publishing company. Once she wore out her welcome there that Passover, Eva drove east into the desert by herself. After a week of tooling around southeastern Arizona, bad food, rude drivers, overpriced gas, a taillight repair, she hit a wall. She pulled over in the middle of nowhere and parked. She did not care anymore. She was there for 3 weeks. She found a small market nearby to shop for food, kept her cell phone charged, washed her hair in the camper sink. She stopped drinking, kept to herself. One morning a lizard crawled into her open doorway, and she looked at it and laughed. Well, make yourself at home. She only left Arizona when the heat became unbearable, heading northeast toward Colorado and the heartland. There, Eva received a call from her stepfather that Irene was being rushed to the emergency room with pneumonia and would she please fly out right away. She was a couple hours from Kansas City that day and raced to hop a flight. She phoned Seamus from the airport and he arranged to meet her in Miami a day later. Irene was on a ventilator when Eva arrived. She saw her mother twice before she passed away. That night, she reached out to Viva, who explained that she couldn't get away from work to attend the funeral. No, Nate, someone has to work. Shut up. I'm talking to my mom, she bellowed at her husband in the background. Eva relied upon Seamus that weekend, feeling that she didn't deserve this patient and generous man she married. She told her husband, as they prepared for the funeral service, that she needed to be on her own a while longer. He told her, "Figure out what you need to do, then bring your butt home to California." She spent a few more weeks on the open road, mostly around the Central Plains states. She thought she might go to Detroit, but she kept changing her plans. There were too many memories there, but nobody left who shared them. She was the only one left, other than her busy daughter. She wanted to hold on to her memories of a loving grandfather, but as she grew older and more mature, she grappled with the understanding that what he presented to his family was not fully the man that he was. Meanwhile, her husband waited for her at home. Eva no longer knew where she came from, and no idea what to do. She was in western Kentucky one night, sitting at a lounge. She was reading a book in a booth, behind the bar, and eating a salad. She had been on the road for 5 months. Suddenly someone entered the lounge and pushed their way toward the bar. Eva sensed activity but didn't look up. Her distraction was interrupted by gunfire. A young man was firing a semi-automatic weapon toward the bar. Eva slid down the booth onto the floor, hiding. 6 people were murdered that night around her. A bullet hole appeared in the leather seat 6 inches from her right ear. Eva pretended to be dead. She squinted her eyes virtually shut, but she saw the blood from the couple who sat in front of her, pooling onto the floor. The shooter jumped over the bar, his back to her, grabbing money from the register and from the pockets of the bartender, lying dead on the ground. He ran off through the door into the night. The shooter was apprehended 3 miles up the road, shot and killed by a deputy sheriff. Someone in the restaurant texted 911. Eva and 8 other patrons survived the shooting, but one was badly wounded and could not walk. Crawling out from under the booth and shakily coming to her feet, Eva was confronted with the violence, the wreckage. The ends of her jeans were soaked in sticky dark blood. After being questioned by the police and looked over by an EMT, she walked 3 parking lots away to check into a hotel, not noticing the level of horror on the front desk clerk's face. She showered and changed her clothes and lay in bed, but could barely sleep. She dreamt angry dreams on and off until dawn. The next morning, she drove to a car lot to see what they would give her for the camper. They cut her a check, and she asked if someone would drive her to the airport. She didn't even call Seamus to let her husband know she'd caught a flight home. She had nothing to say. She hailed a ride share from the Reno Tahoe airport, and at her house, rang the doorbell as though she were a visitor. Seamus opened the door and let her in. Seamus was diagnosed with prostate cancer 3 years later. He agreed to take chemo, but refused radiation. They consulted with Eastern healers in the region. They switched to a mostly vegan diet and took meditation classes together. Viva got divorced in the spring of 38. When she called her mom to tell her the news, Eva excitedly thought she was ringing her to say she was pregnant. "You mean I'm not going to be a grandmother?" Viva chuckled. "I'm almost 42, Mommy. You want more kids? You have them." It was May of Eva's 82nd year, and spring had arrived. She worked part-time at a craft store, making wreaths of lavender and wildflowers. She felt excited because she was planning to visit her daughter in a few weeks. Viva was throwing a birthday party, her 55th, and asked her mother to fly down. Eva had been thinking about Beatrice. She'd long forgiven her grandmother, who was born a generation too soon to enjoy the kind of life a woman had the right to live. Beatrice was never free to choose her own path. She could only manipulate the road that she had been placed upon. Eva occasionally still saw Bibi when she looked into the mirror, and that was okay. Seamus was gone 20 years. Widowed so young, friends would set her up with bachelors her age or a little younger. Eva always had a pleasant conversation with the men, but she never pursued anything romantic. Lunch dates and gallery openings were all the commitment she desired to make. After Seamus died, she started going to synagogue, and finally found something that settled her restless spirit. 2 years after his death, she sold their house and bought a condo in Chico. During Viva's party, Eva learned that her daughter was going to take a year off from running the seismic lab to travel to Bhutan to install science labs in several high schools on behalf of a major NGO. Eva fretted at the idea of her daughter being overseas for a whole year. Memories of her late sister weighed on her mind, knowing that she never saw Lena after she departed for Europe. Eva wondered if she and her sister really made their peace. She never got to atone for what she stole. Some strange fear would creep into her dreams, imagining that while Viva was overseas, Lena's spirit would claim the daughter that should have been hers. The year that Viva was gone was hard on Eva, but she buried herself in her crafts and joined a choral group at Temple. After Viva returned from Bhutan, she spent 4 months at her mother's, filled with activities like two good girlfriends. She decided to move closer to keep an eye on Eva and applied for a residency at CSU Stanislaus. At 94 years of age, Eva woke during a warm August night, breathless and parched. She tiptoed into the bathroom of her apartment to get a glass of water, and back again, crawling on top of the sheets to find relief from the California heat. She settled in, fell asleep, and stopped breathing 10 minutes later. Warm, happy, healthy, and with a full life, Eva Jeanette Ashner peacefully died. Viva threw herself further into work and all of her committees after her mother's death. She understood that she was the last one, the very last person in her family, and she wanted to leave some kind of lasting work behind. Ms. Ashner was an honored colleague, a delightful friend, and much respected in her community. She put off retirement year after year, worried that her legacy wasn't strong enough. In her later years, she was frequently asked to speak on the seismological implications of fracking. She was part of a symposium gathered in upstate New York that would eventually lead to the banning of the practice in the U.S. She retired a month before her 70th birthday, finally feeling satisfied with her professional ambitions. Viva was a wealthy woman and chose to pass on her wealth and experience to others. She opened a center for at-risk youth in Reading. There they had a recreation center, a gaming room, a kitchen to prepare food, and a sustainable garden, along with a mini science lab and gym. She spent most of her afternoons at the community center when she wasn't traveling and speaking. Still a cut-up and a storyteller, the young people particularly enjoyed Viva's still vigorous energy. One of the teens who came to the center each weekday after school, Aiden, was the son of a corrections officer who was killed on the job by a gang leader. The kid was on track for a life of crime himself, but his mother was determined to steer him right and hauled his ass to the community center each afternoon. He nicknamed Viva Lady Thug because of how tough she seemed, but he respected her. Many young people at the center discovered an alternative to a life of crime that might otherwise befall them. Viva chose not to have children, but they found a way to her nonetheless. She knew that Aiden liked lemon cupcakes, so she arranged for the center to have them catered for his 16th birthday. She bought the teen a nice tie because he told her that when he went to church with his grandma, he felt weird wearing a suit without one. "Thank you," he beamed, and hugged his benefactor. "I'ma look so sharp in my suit now." Viva showed Aiden how to put on the tie. "There," she patted his shoulders. "You can wear this when you go on an interview later. I'm so glad you told me you're reconsidering going to college." The following month, he was arrested for vandalism, along with 3 of his friends. His frantic mom messaged Viva, who put up the $2,200 bail on the condition that she be permitted to talk to him. She let the kid sweat it out first, however. The officers told him to sit inside the lobby until his ride showed up. When Viva came that night, she took him on a 4-hour drive. Whatever she said that night sank in. Aiden was still drawn to friends who liked to dare him, but he never got arrested again. Aiden did go to college and began studying robotics. He dropped out his junior year, but returned to his studies 18 months later. He and his girlfriend had a baby girl, and they weren't making ends meet at his sales job. He finished his degree and got a job with a leading Chinese manufacturer in aerospace design. A few years later, he received a promotion and was transferred to Vancouver. That year, Viva was approaching her 83rd birthday. He still called her Lady, though he'd dropped the thug part of her nickname more than a decade before. His daughter, who was half Italian, called her Nonna. He offered to support her if she needed money. She waved it off. "I'm fine. I always was a saver." In fact, she had money left from her inheritance 8 decades before. When Viva passed away 6 years later, Aiden and his wife insisted on paying for her funeral. He had her ashes shot into space so that someday, somehow, maybe an Ashner would return to Earth as an asteroid.